My name was Ibrahim Al-Mansur. I was a judge, a guardian of justice in a realm echoing with the whispers of faith and law. Respected by many, yet haunted by an unshakable emptiness, I sat on a throne of contradictions. My life revolved around the scales of justice, but within my heart, a relentless storm raged, a longing for truth that my faith had never fulfilled. It wasn't until a moment, so unexpected and profound, shattered my existence, that I truly understood. One day, as the gavel struck down in the solemn federal court of Washington, D.C., I found myself clutching not only legal briefs, but the very essence of my soul. A collapse, both in body and spirit, plunged me into darkness, where I was stripped of my titles and fears. In that abyss, a blinding light emerged, illuminating a figure I thought I would never meet, Jesus. He called my name, not to condemn but to liberate, revealing truths that pierced the very fabric of my being. In that celestial courtroom, I saw the veils of my past lifted, the chains of religious dogma shattered before my eyes. It was an awakening far beyond mere belief. It was a revolutionary truth that intertwined faith with freedom, a call to break away from the oppressive shadows that had shrouded my heart for so long. But upon returning to the world, shunned and labeled a traitor, I faced an unbearable solitude. Labeled a renegade by my own people, I was ensnared in a web of fear and regret, forced to wrestle with the haunting question, what if I had lost everything? Yet in that darkness, a flicker of hope ignited. I sought out a truth that transcended the confines I had always known, delving into scripture and connecting with others who walked that same perilous path. As I prayed in secret, I felt the stirrings of a rebirth, a divine call to challenge the silence that suffocated my spirit. Today, I invite you to embark on this journey with me. A journey of awakening from the shackles of fear and into the light of truth. Together, we will explore how the encounter with Jesus not only transformed my life, but possesses the power to break chains everywhere. Before we dive deeper, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Your presence is a testament that truth knows no boundaries. And if your heart resonates with the freedom found in Jesus, subscribe to Truth from Beyond. You don't want to miss the revelations that await us. The moment I entered the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., I felt the weight of the atmosphere pressing down around me. It buzzed with heated debates about religious freedom and civil rights, tensions heightened by the stark realities of a politically charged environment. I've spent my career as a judge, dedicated to interpreting the law while balancing the scales of justice against the backdrop of my faith. But on this day, as I prepared to hear a case that lay at the very intersection of faith and justice, I found myself grappling with an internal conflict I hadn't anticipated. As the arguments were presented, voices rose and fell like a wave crashing against the shoreline. One side fervently defending the rights of individuals to express their beliefs, the other arguing for the preservation of societal norms. Suddenly, in the midst of this cacophony, I felt an unfamiliar heaviness swell within me. My heart raced, and I could hardly focus on the proceedings before me. It was as if the very essence of the courtroom began to fade. Colors turned to gray, and sounds grew muffled. This overwhelming sensation pulled me away from the room, a force I could neither understand nor resist. In an instant, I was enveloped in pure light, a radiant glow that seemed to emanate from all directions. The court faded away entirely, and there, standing before me, was Jesus. It was not an imagined figure, but a profound and unmistakable presence that filled me with both trepidation and wonder. He looked into my soul, and in that gaze, I felt every burden I carried, the doubts, the fears, the relentless questioning of my purpose. And then, he spoke. "You've been seeking truth amidst deception, caught in a spiritual war that rages unseen." Each word pierced through the chaos of my mind, igniting something deep within me. As he unveiled the layers of hidden agendas shaping our world, I was shown glimpses of the forces manipulating society, a web spun by the elite, designed to distract us from the true nature of our existence. I witnessed how leaders operated under veils of deceit, their actions driven not by the welfare of the people, but by a hunger for power. I saw entire communities torn apart by divisive rhetoric, and I realized this was not just about laws or beliefs. It was about the very fabric of our humanity being torn and frayed under the weight of manipulation. It was a spiritual battle fought in the shadows, where the truth was obscured by layers of lies. The urgency of his message surged through me. "Now is the time for awakening," he said, and I felt the fire of that calling ignite in my soul. I understood the significance of my role as a judge. I was not merely a figure of authority in a courtroom, but a vessel for truth in the midst of deception. I could see how the legal battles we fight are manifestations of a deeper struggle. It dawned on me that the fight for civil rights transcends mere laws. It's about unearthing the truth buried beneath a mountain of societal indifference and emotional detachment. Each case that passed through my court held the potential to influence the awakening of those who sought justice and understanding. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back, the blinding light dimming, while the distant sounds of the courtroom began filtering back into my consciousness. As I opened my eyes, the familiar curiosity and fervor of my colleagues filled the room, yet I felt profoundly changed, as if the very air hummed with the urgency of action. I realized I was faced with a choice: to remain just a judge, observing the events unfold, or to become an advocate for truth, a beacon in this spiritual war we're all a part of. But how could I gather the strength to stand in the face of such pervasive deception? How could I, one man in a sea of uncertainty, ignite the spark of awakening needed to bring about true transformation? I've spent the last 2 decades as a judge, working tirelessly to uphold justice, but beneath the dignified exterior, a profound emotional void gnawed at my soul. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and I've built my life around the principles of fairness and honor in the legal system. Yet each day, as I donned my robes and walked into the courtroom, I felt the emptiness deepen. Adhering to Islamic traditions has always been central to my identity. Yet I found myself yearning for something beyond the rituals, a searching for truth, hungry for connection with the divine. This inner turmoil grew heavier, creating a dissonance that demanded resolution. It was during a particularly tense session in federal court that everything changed. The atmosphere crackled with intensity as passionate arguments flew back and forth regarding religious freedom and civil rights. I was supposed to be the impartial observer, but the weight of it all pressed down on me. In the midst of heated claims, I felt a dizzying tightness in my chest, the walls of the courtroom closing in. I can't clearly explain how it happened, but suddenly, I found myself slipping into a different realm, a void that transported me far from the clamor of legal proceedings. In that moment, I was enveloped by an overwhelming light, one so brilliant that it seemed to cut through the very fabric of my confusion. It was there, standing in front of me, that I encountered Jesus. His presence radiated love and compassion, But what struck me most was the intensity in his eyes, a knowing gaze that pierced straight through my soul. As he approached, I could feel the burdens I carried begin to lift. "Ibrahim," he spoke, and in that singular word, a torrent of understanding flooded my mind. "You're caught in the deception of this world, in a spiritual war that requires your awakening." What followed was an onslaught of revelations. I witnessed the hidden agendas that manipulate our lives, the machinations of the elite who thrive on division rather than unity. I saw how societal conflicts are often orchestrated by those in power, using fear and misunderstanding as weapons against us. The political landscape transformed before my eyes, revealing the true nature of the conflicts that have torn communities apart. Leaders, once seen as heroes, morphed into puppets bound by unseen strings, their priorities misplaced, their actions driven by agendas that have nothing to do with the welfare of the people they serve. With each insight, a sense of urgency washed over me. Jesus spoke of a need for awakening, an awakening not just of the mind, but of the heart. The truth lies hidden beneath layers of deception, beneath the fear that keeps you bound, he urged. I realized the fight for justice wasn't just about laws or verdicts. It was about uncovering the deeper truths that govern our existence. Each day I entered that courtroom, and each decision I made held the potential to ignite change and challenge the status quo. I felt called to be more than a judge. I was to be a light in the darkness, a voice for those who had been silenced by injustice and deceit. Suddenly, I felt the light around me beginning to dim as if the very essence of this experience was slipping away. The courtroom's noise grew louder, calling me back to my reality, yet I was forever changed. As I opened my eyes, the weight of what I had witnessed pulsed through my veins. I was still seated at the bench, but now the case before me was no longer just about law. It was a call to action. How could I transform my newfound understanding into a force for change? The road ahead seemed daunting. I was stepping into a spiritual war armed with revelation, knowing that the awakening required was only just beginning. As I knelt in prayer, the familiar words felt increasingly hollow, echoing off the walls of my mind without truly connecting to my heart. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and for years I've upheld the traditions of my faith as a respected judge. Yet recently, a growing emptiness enveloped me, a gnawing sense that the strict interpretations of Islam I had followed were somehow missing the deeper truths I sought. I struggled to reconcile my belief in a loving God with the rigid doctrines that dictated so much of my life. Each evening, as I prepared to engage in my spiritual practices, a part of me hesitated, questioning whether I was merely participating in rituals designed to enforce conformity rather than inspire genuine connection. What compounded my unease were the dreams that invaded my nights. Dreams filled with light and a presence that beckoned me to explore more profound truths. I could see a luminous figure, radiating warmth and love, a stark contrast to the doctrines that felt cold and distant. These dreams were becoming more vivid, compelling me to delve into the spiritual realm I had often kept at arm's length. I found myself contemplating the idea that religion could be wielded as a tool of social control, that the very institutions I respected might be masking a hidden agenda that obscured the truth. These realizations scared me, for they implied that everything I believed might rely on a web of deception. During one of those restless nights, I awoke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding heavily in my chest. As I lay in the darkness, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I felt an overwhelming urge to seek answers. I needed to understand what these visions meant, who this being in my dreams was, and why I felt so drawn to it. I began researching, poring over texts that had been out of reach, seeking knowledge I never dared to pursue before. With every word, I sensed an awakening deep within, a stirring that filled the void I had carried for so long. I felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration, wondering where this path would take me, but also deeply aware of the risk involved. It wasn't long before I found myself standing in the midst of an unexpected spiritual journey. One day, after a particularly intense dream, I felt a pull, a direct call to explore a deeper connection with Jesus. I was hesitant but intrigued. Was it possible that the Christ I had always viewed through the lens of historical context could offer answers to the questions gnawing at me? I could feel my heart racing at the thought. The next moments were pivotal. I closed my eyes and reached out to that luminous being I had seen in my dreams, yearning for an encounter that would change everything. What followed was beyond anything I could have imagined. In what felt like a waking dream, I found myself enveloped in brilliant light. Suddenly, Jesus stood before me, a presence so palpable, so filled with love that I felt every burden melt away. He looked into my soul, and in that moment, I experienced a revelation, a flood of understanding about the spiritual war raging around me. Jesus spoke of deception deep within our systems, the likes of which I had never grasped before. I glimpsed the manipulation of the elite, their hidden agenda orchestrating chaos, feeding upon fear and division. As I stood entranced, he continued to unveil truths about faith, society, and politics, guiding me toward an awakening I had desperately sought yet feared to fully embrace. With every word, a sense of urgency sparked within me, igniting a newfound confidence that I had not felt in years. But as the light pulsed around me, I knew this journey was only beginning, and the challenges that awaited would demand every ounce of courage I had within me. It happened in an instant, a critical hearing that shifted the very ground beneath my feet. As I sat in the courtroom, surrounded by the weight of expectations and the cacophony of competing arguments, the dizzying darkness consumed me. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and I've spent years navigating the intricacies of law, balancing justice and duty, while wrestling with an internal void that had been growing. In that moment, trapped between the duties of my position and the discontent in my heart, I suddenly collapsed, unaware that I was slipping fast into the depths of unconsciousness. When I regained awareness, I wasn't in the sterile confines of the courthouse's interior, but rather bathed in a radiant light, surrounded by what felt like an ethereal courtroom. It was a place void of shadows, alive with an energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. I was overcome with a sense of both fear and wonder as I looked around. In this spiritual courtroom, I was confronted not only by the magnitude of this divine presence, but also by the evident truth that I was being judged, not for rules of law, but for the burdens I had carried, the questions I had suppressed. Then I saw him, Jesus, standing before me, his presence all-encompassing, radiating compassion and love. My heart raced, caught between reverence and a longing that seemed to transcend the physical realm. In that moment, I felt my doubts begin to dissipate, washed away by the unconditional love that emanated from him. Without uttering a word, he projected into my mind a series of revelations that shook the very foundations of my beliefs. I witnessed the hidden agendas of the elite, who wielded power like a sword, manipulating the masses through fear and deception. The truth became a stark reality, laying bare the spiritual war that raged within my heart and the world around me. I saw how organized beliefs, once intended to guide and uplift, had often been twisted into tools of social control, forcing compliance over genuine understanding. The division in society, between faiths, cultures, and even families, unfurled before me, a tapestry of misinformation designed to keep us fighting against one another while the true agenda unfolded behind the scenes. I was shown that the struggle for freedom extended far beyond the walls of a courtroom. It permeated every institution, every influential figure we placed our trust in. The dichotomy between truth and deception wasn't merely a philosophical discourse, it was a matter of spiritual survival. In that divine courtroom, the urgency of awakening became apparent. Jesus looked into my eyes, and in that gaze I felt a calling so profound it echoed through every fiber of my being. "You are not just a judge," he said, "but a warrior of truth in this spiritual war." The weight of that calling inspired both fear and determination. I was to take these revelations back into a world fraught with denial, to confront societal repression head-on. My heart swelled with emotion as the implications of this mission unfolded. I realized that sharing this truth could awaken others, but it also carried the risk of backlash, alienation from the very community I cherished. As the light around me began to dim, I felt a pull, a transition back into the physical realm. The once vibrant courtroom faded, but the resonance of Jesus' words lingered in my mind, pressing me to act. I opened my eyes, suddenly back in the courtroom, disoriented yet electrified by the revelations I had just experienced. I was alive with purpose, but the challenges that awaited were steep and daunting. My life would never be the same. An awakening had been ignited within me, and I was compelled to share this incredible truth, regardless of the consequences that awaited me in a world still shrouded in deception. When I woke up from the coma, I was disoriented and terrified, not fully grasping where I was. My mind echoed with remnants of the divine courtroom I had just left. Yet, the moment the sterile scent of the hospital filled my nostrils, reality crashed down on me like a wave. It wasn't just a clinical setting that shocked me. It was the betrayal lurking in the air. My life had changed irrevocably during my time in the light, but upon returning, I faced a harsh reality. My family and colleagues were not welcoming my newfound beliefs with open arms. Instead, I was met with cold, hard condemnation. The reactions felt like daggers, each word a painful reminder of my previous life. Traitor. They called me, their eyes filled with a mixture of disdain and betrayal. How could I explain to them the profound awakening I had experienced, the revelation shared by Jesus that transformed my understanding of faith and truth? They didn't want to hear about the deception I had witnessed, the hidden agenda of the elite, the manipulation that had become so pervasive in society. Instead, they dismissed me, wrapping my name in a cloak of shame that weighed heavily on my heart. Their resentment stung, and the emotional isolation began to seep into my very being, wrapping around me like a dark fog. Each day felt heavier than the last. The urge to reconnect with my roots, to cling to the familiar, was almost suffocating. I walked through the hallways of my home, past pictures that represented happier times, encounters filled with love and tradition. Those moments now felt tainted by the very beliefs that were meant to unite us. I realized that the guilt I felt was not solely from my departure from the familiar, but stemmed from the fear of being permanently ostracized from the cultural identity I had cherished for so long. How could I hold on to my faith in Jesus while straining against the might of the community around me? The physical isolation soon became evident too. Invitations to family gatherings dwindled, and I found myself excluded from conversations that had once brought life into my home. I sat in silence, longing to reach out and share the truth I had uncovered, the realities about the societal deceptions that keep us divided and fearful. But every time I opened my mouth, the fear gripped me. What if they rejected me even more? What if my quest for awakening alienated me for good? The burden was crushing. I was caught between two worlds, neither of which felt like home anymore. As I grappled with doubts, each moment of solitude became a mixed blessing. In the stillness, I would revisit the divine revelations I experienced. Jesus' words echoed in my mind, reminding me of my purpose. He had called me to face this spiritual war head-on, to expose the truths obscured by layers of deception. I knew I couldn't remain silent forever, but the path ahead was daunting. I felt a growing urgency within me, a calling to stand firm in faith, even as the world around me seemed to be collapsing. This inner conflict reached a boiling point. I desperately wanted to awaken others, but at what cost to my own soul and sense of belonging? Late at night, as I lay awake, I sought clarity amid the turmoil. The questions lurked, merciless and persistent. Was I ready to face the potential backlash from my family and community? Could I bear the weight of my convictions alone, fearful of losing what had once defined me? But deep down, I heard the whispers of hope and promise, urging me to rise above my fears. The truth was like a beacon in the darkness, calling me not just to reclaim my own identity, but to ignite the spark of awakening in those around me. I felt Jesus' presence guiding me back toward courage, reminding me that the battle for truth was worth fighting. After facing the harsh condemnation from my family and colleagues for my newfound beliefs, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency to explore the truth that had shattered my old worldview. Undeterred by the threats of isolation, I embarked on a clandestine journey to uncover the mysteries hidden within the pages of the Bible. I had spent years entrenched in legal texts, but now I craved spiritual knowledge and understanding. Each night, when the world around me had gone silent, I would pull out my worn copy of the scriptures. The moment the pages opened, I felt awakening coursing through my veins, a desire to reconnect with the divine truth I had encountered during my near-death experience. As I delved deeper into these teachings, I stumbled upon stories of others who had also undergone miraculous transformations. Their testimonies resonated with me, igniting hope in the corners of my heart that had long been shadowed by fear. I was no longer alone in my struggle. Online communities began to surface, spaces where individuals from diverse backgrounds could gather, share their experiences, and encourage one another. People who, like me, had grappled with the spiritual war waged within and around them. In those virtual meetings, I discovered acceptance and affirmation, a sanctuary for the fear-stricken heart searching for truth in a world filled with deception. I was especially drawn to discussions about personal encounters with Jesus and how those moments had changed the trajectory of many lives. Each story unfolded like a thread in a larger tapestry, revealing the hidden agenda of societal manipulation perpetuated by the elite, who seemed intent on maintaining a status quo of division and fear. My own awakening felt like a revelation within a revelation, each encounter peeling away the layers of deceit that had accumulated around my beliefs. It was exhilarating and terrifying, a push and pull that kept me on the edge of my resolve. Every prayer I uttered to Jesus brought me a step closer to liberation, a chance to confront the paralyzing fear of losing everything I held dear, my family, my community, my identity. In those quiet moments, anxiety clawed at me, reminding me of the precarious nature of my new path. The guilt of potentially turning my back on my roots coiled tightly around my stomach as I wrestled with the consequences of my beliefs. But deep within, I felt a calling stronger than the fear, urging me to forge ahead, to trust in this divine connection that promised so much more than I had ever known. Each day I immersed myself in prayer and Bible study, even as I faced the reality of the impending loneliness. I envisioned the faces of my loved ones, the traditions we once celebrated together, the laughter, the shared meals, the sacred rituals that had defined my existence. Could I truly walk away from it all? The very thought sent ripples of dread through my soul. Yet, with each moment I spent in dialogue with Jesus, guidance poured forth. I realized that my journey was not only about discovering the truth for myself, but also about igniting a spark of awakening in others who battled their own inner turmoil. And as the urgency swelled within me, I recognized that the fight was not just for my soul but for the souls of countless others, lost in a world so shrouded in darkness. As the days passed after my awakening, I began to grasp the magnitude of my experience. It was no longer just about my personal journey. I realized that the truth I had encountered with Jesus transcended individual belief. It was a call to action against the oppressive forces that seek to silence voices like mine. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and while I had always prioritized justice as a judge, the revelations I received had opened my eyes to the wider implications of the spiritual war being waged around us. A determination began to grow within me, compelling me to stand against the religious oppression that often masked itself as tradition or faith. Navigating my newfound purpose was daunting. I often felt like a lone voice in the wilderness, surrounded by the familiar faces of family and friends who had not yet awakened to these truths. They remained entrenched in their beliefs, tethered to a culture that often shunned those who dared to challenge the status quo. I felt a gnawing urgency to break that silence within my culture, to echo the truths I had learned, but the fear of rejection loomed large. Would my community hear my message, or would they bury their heads in the sand, afraid of the awakening that might come from confronting their own beliefs? The tension mounted as I started sharing my experiences with a small circle. I spoke of the hidden agendas I had witnessed, the manipulation by the elite that kept our communities divided and submissive. Each story I shared was met with skepticism, and I could see the doubt flickering in their eyes. Yet, there were glimmers of understanding, a realization that perhaps what I was saying resonated with their own unspoken doubts and fears. I could feel it, a collective spark just waiting to ignite. It empowered me further. This wasn't just me against the world. It was a potential movement toward enlightenment and truth that was growing in strength. As more individuals began to join our discussions, I became increasingly aware of the deeper connections between our struggles and the larger societal issues at play. I spoke about the wars waged not only on foreign soil but within our hearts and communities. The deception we encountered in our daily lives. It was an insidious whisper that told us to conform, to silence our questions. Every question we failed to ask deepened the chasm that kept us from recognizing the truth. Jesus had revealed that this spiritual war was not merely one of faith, but of survival, and I felt a profound responsibility to light the way for others. Every gathering felt like a proving ground, a place where we could confront each other's fears while standing firm in our awakening. I shared my story of how Jesus had called me not just to find truth for myself, but to help awaken others, even as those truths could shatter the very foundations of the beliefs we had all held. In those moments of candid dialogue, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope rise within me. Together, we could confront the forces that sought to keep us divided. Together, we could begin to unravel the deception that had held us captive for so long. And as that hope ignited, I knew the journey had only just begun. The decision to resign from my position as a judge was not one I made lightly. After my profound encounter with Jesus during that terrifying moment in the courtroom, I found myself grappling with a radical shift in my identity. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and until recently, I had lived my life entangled in strict adherence to the laws of society, wielding my gavel as an instrument of justice. But standing in the light of revelation, I understood that my role in this world had shifted dramatically. I was no longer just a figure of authority. I was a messenger, compelled to share the truth I had discovered, even if it meant adopting a new identity. As I prepared to step away from the life I had known, I could feel the weight of impending danger. The threats of condemnation from my community loomed large. Those who had once viewed me with respect might now see me as a traitor, a man abandoning my roots for what they perceived as heresy. But I felt an unshakable conviction washing over me. It was as if Jesus himself was urging me onward, emphasizing that this spiritual war being waged around us required not just knowledge of the truth, but brave souls willing to stand for it, regardless of the cost. With each passing day, the urgency of my mission intensified. I began to seek out those who had also been transformed by their experiences with Jesus. I connected with other seekers, individuals who had dared to look beyond the facade of societal norms and uncover the hidden agendas of the elite. These conversations fueled my spirit, igniting a fire of passion within me. I embraced my new identity, no longer just a judge bound by rules, but an evangelist spreading the message of awakening. Every moment spent sharing my testimony became an act of defiance against a system that sought to render us powerless through deception. Still, the fear gnawed at me relentlessly. I thought of my family, the love we had shared, the traditions we had upheld. Would they ever understand my transformation? I grappled with the possibility of losing them forever. But in that turmoil, I also felt the stirring of hope. I envisioned a world where the truth could rally people together, where bonds could be reforged through understanding rather than fear. I knew the fight for that truth wasn't just personal. It resonated with countless others who felt trapped within their belief systems, yearning for liberation from the chains that held them back. Each prayer became a plea for courage, a request for guidance as I stepped into this new phase of my life. I felt myself positioned at the front lines of a spiritual battle, lined against the forces that perpetuated division and deception. The battle wasn't just against the elite, against the manipulation of information, but against the fear in each of our hearts that prevented us from awakening. As I prepared myself for this journey into the unknown, the promise of freedom through truth beckoned. I could feel the pulse of something greater than myself coursing through me. I was ready to embrace the risk, to rise up and share the profound transformation that had reshaped both my life and my relationship with God. The moment had arrived. I stood before a small gathering of people, a mixture of seekers and believers, in a modest community center, feeling a knot of anxiety and anticipation tightening in my chest. This was it. My opportunity to share the truth that had transformed my life after the near-death experience in the courtroom. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and today I would defy the societal norms that sought to suppress my voice. The fear that gripped me was suffocating, but the calling to speak out against the hidden agendas of the elite burned brighter. I could no longer allow the deception that binds so many to keep me silent. As I stepped into the makeshift podium, I looked out at the faces before me. Each one reflected a yearning for hope and a thirst for truth. I could see in their eyes the flicker of doubt, the same grappling I had faced when I first embraced the call of Jesus. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and began to recount my journey, the dark night of the soul that ultimately led to awakening. I shared how I had once been immersed in the legal world, where the concept of justice was often lost in bureaucracy, and where voices like mine were silenced by fear. But then, in my moment of despair, I encountered Jesus, a revelation that shattered the chains of my former beliefs. I spoke about the revelations he shared with me, illuminating the spiritual war that rages unseen. I described the manipulation I had witnessed, how the elite wielded power to maintain control and perpetuate division among us. With each word, I felt the tension in the room rise, the urgency of my message seeping into the hearts of those listening. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't just my battle. It was a collective struggle against the deception that sought to entrap us all. As I shared my narrative of freedom, I could see the seeds of awakening taking root in their hearts. The stories of others I had encountered were woven into my testimony, those who had similarly felt the divine tug to rise above the murky waters of societal expectations. I encouraged my audience to confront their own fears, to shatter the silence that binds them to a life of conformity. You have the power to defy the narratives that have been forced upon you, I urged, my voice rising with passion. It's time to reclaim your truth and embrace the divine calling that seeks to unite us all in love, instead of division. As the gravity of my words settled, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the tension. People began to nod, to lean in, and I could see them engaging with the ideas I presented. I spoke of the wars not just occurring on distant lands, but the battles raging within each of us, perpetuated by fear and manipulation. I reminded them that acknowledging these truths was the first step toward liberation. Our awakening starts when we refuse to be silenced by the very forces that thrive on our division, I declared, a surge of determination rushing through me. But as I concluded, a wave of apprehension washed over me. I was aware that some would not welcome this message of awakening with open arms. The threat of backlash loomed large, and I knew the community I cherished might push back against my revelations. Even so, I understood that the fight for truth required taking risks. With the warmth of Jesus' presence bolstering my resolve, I stepped away from the podium, ready to embrace the uncertain path ahead. It was clear. I had broken free from the chains that tethered me, and now I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in this spiritual journey. Years have passed since I first encountered Jesus in that federal courtroom, but the impact of that moment altered the very trajectory of my life. Now I find myself in a place of refuge, dedicated to mentoring those who seek to escape oppressive systems that bind them. My name is Ibrahim Al-Mansur, and I have transformed my pain into purpose, using my testimony as a beacon of hope for others. Each day, as I sit across from individuals grappling with similar struggles, I see reflections of my former self, pain, fear, and a longing for freedom that resonates deeply within me. In these mentoring sessions, I share the revelations I received during my near-death experience, the truths that shattered the illusions I once held. The spiritual war we face is not merely a narrative but a lived reality, and I feel compelled to awaken others to the deception woven through the fabric of our lives. I recount my journey and the way that Jesus opened my eyes to the hidden agendas of the elite, forces that thrive on division and manipulation. I've learned that the battles we wage are not just physical or legal, they are spiritual, fought within our hearts and minds. Primarily, these battles demand a courageous pursuit of truth. Every person who steps into this safe space carries their burdens, stories of oppression, loss, and fear. I listen as they describe the weight of societal expectations and the pain of betrayal from those they once trusted. Through sharing my own experiences, I strive to provide them with tools for healing. I emphasize that awakening requires not only understanding, but the willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths that challenge everything we've been taught. Each story is a vital thread in the tapestry of change we are weaving together, one that could potentially illuminate paths for countless others still ensnared in fear. The hope of reconciling with my estranged family persists in the back of my mind. I often reflect on how I might bridge the gap between my new understanding and the traditional beliefs they hold dear. Would they ever recognize that my awakening was not a rejection of our shared past, but a commitment to a deeper, more authentic faith? As I mentor others, the urgency to communicate this truth burns brighter within me. I dream of a day when I can share these insights with my family, showing them that love and faith are not bound by rigid dogmas, but are living, breathing forces that can unite us in understanding. Yet I remain acutely aware of the dangers we face. The threat of backlash looms for those who dare to step outside the lines drawn by their communities. My heart aches when I think of individuals silenced for speaking their truth, held captive by the very systems that claim to offer safety and belonging. As I engage with those in my care, I encourage them to find their voice, to stand firm in their awakening, knowing that the fight for freedom is often fraught with peril but ultimately necessary. We are all intertwined in this quest for liberation, and my role is to guide them as we navigate these turbulent waters together, shining a light on the path to spiritual truth and awakening. Now that you've journeyed with me through the profound depths of my experience, I must say this. Do you ever feel an unseen web of influence, a hidden agenda that shapes our world, pulling at the strings of belief and identity? It's a question that lingers, isn't it? That feeling of being a pawn in a game much larger than ourselves, that something is awakening within us all at this very moment. In my near-death experience, I encountered the powerful and liberating truth of Jesus, a truth that calls us to break free from chains of deception and fear. As I returned to my old life, branded a traitor, I realized the war for our souls is raging quietly beneath the surface of our lives. Each choice to seek truth is an invitation to awaken, to step beyond the shadows that have been cast upon us. And that means you too are part of this spiritual revolution. So I ask you now, have you ever faced the weight of expectations that suffocates your spirit? Or perhaps felt a stirring deep inside you, urging you to question everything you've been taught? Your voice matters. Share your story in the comments. I want to hear from you and connect over our shared experiences in this journey of awakening. Together, we can challenge the narratives that divide us. If this message resonated with you, don't leave without subscribing to Truth from Beyond and hitting that notification bell. It's important because we're diving even deeper into these dark truths and profound revelations in future videos, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. In the next episode, we'll explore another incredible testimony of someone who overcame the shadows through a transformative encounter with divinity. I'm Ibrahim Al-Mansur. Thank you for joining me on this journey. As you step into the day ahead, remember this: awakening is not a destination, but a continual path, one that requires courage, faith, and a commitment to seeking truth.